There's a moment in every relationship where the anxious partner, the one who has always fought for closeness, reassurance, and connection, finally stops chasing. And when that happens, the avoidant suddenly realizes what they've lost. You see, anxious partners often carry the emotional weight of the relationship. They're the ones texting first, trying to fix problems, trying to get clarity, trying to bridge the gap. They give, they compromise, they bend. But here's the truth. When that anxious partner finally stops, when they reach the point of emotional exhaustion and decide, I can't do this anymore, everything changes. Why? Because the avoidant, who's been running from intimacy, suddenly no longer feels chased, and the silence they once claimed to want becomes deafening. The irony is brutal. The anxious partner has been terrified of abandonment, but it's their withdrawal that creates the exact abandonment the avoidant never thought they'd feel. That's when the regret kicks in. But here's the power shift. When the anxious partner finally chooses themselves over chasing someone unavailable, they unlock a different kind of strength. It's not about punishment. It's about saying, I deserve reciprocity. I deserve peace. And often, that's the very moment the avoidant realizes they may have just lost the best thing they ever had. When someone has an anxious attachment style, their instinct in relationships is to pursue closeness. They want reassurance, connection, and a feeling of certainty. This often means they're the ones initiating conversations, checking in when the energy feels off, or trying to bridge emotional gaps when distance appears. To the avoidant partner, this can sometimes feel overwhelming, like pressure or even neediness, because the avoidant is wired to protect their independence and guard against what feels like too much intimacy. But here's the paradox. The anxious partner's pursuit is not weakness, it's an attempt to repair and secure the bond. Their energy keeps the relationship alive, even when it's one-sided. Now imagine what happens when that anxious partner, after months or years of giving, finally reaches their limit. It's not an explosive moment. It's not yelling, screaming, or ultimatums. It's quieter than that. They simply stop chasing. They no longer send the good morning texts. They no longer initiate the "we need to talk" conversations. They stop trying to read between the lines of mixed signals. And that silence, that stillness, is deafening to the avoidant. For the avoidant, silence isn't what they thought it would be. At first, they believe it's relief. No more pressure, no one pulling on them emotionally. But then, as days and weeks pass, they begin to notice what's missing. The anxious partner's pursuit was a signal of love, devotion, and commitment, even if it sometimes came in a form the avoidant struggled with. Without it, the avoidant is left in a vacuum. The texts don't come, the check-ins don't happen. There's no one on the other side waiting to reassure them they're cared for, even when they themselves weren't giving much back. This is the moment where silence speaks louder than words. Because what the anxious partner has taken away is not just their voice. It's their energy, their presence, and their emotional labor. And that absence makes the avoidant feel something they rarely confront. Loss. They realize that what they mistook for pressure was actually the glue holding the relationship together. They may not admit it immediately, but the discomfort starts to creep in. Regret builds. They replay moments when their partner reached out, moments they dismissed, moments they pushed away. Suddenly, they see those attempts not as neediness, but as love. The silence of the anxious partner forces the avoidant to sit with the reality that relationships don't sustain themselves. Someone has to care enough to fight, to show up, to close the gap when distance grows. For so long, the anxious partner did that work. The avoidant may not have noticed it until it was gone, but once it is, they feel the contrast sharply. They feel the weight of what they didn't appreciate. That's why the silence isn't just absence. It's a mirror. It reflects back to the avoidant everything they've been avoiding, and it's in that quiet space where regret often begins to bloom. Avoidant partners often tell themselves they crave space. To them, closeness can feel suffocating, and vulnerability feels like a loss of control. They equate emotional intimacy with dependency, and dependency feels dangerous. So when their partner reaches for them, whether through a question, a touch, or an attempt to resolve conflict, the avoidant instinct is to pull away. That space becomes their safety zone, a way of maintaining independence and keeping their emotions in check. In the moment, it feels like freedom. They can breathe again without the pressure of someone else's needs or emotions demanding their attention. But what the avoidant rarely sees is that space, when stretched too far, doesn't remain neutral. At first, it feels like a solution. There's no argument, no tension, no sense of being cornered. Yet with time, the silence grows heavy. The partner who once filled that space with energy, love, and persistence is no longer doing so. And the avoidant begins to discover that the freedom they were guarding isn't freedom at all. It's isolation. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this realization doesn't come immediately. They may spend days or weeks enjoying the quiet, convincing themselves that it's exactly what they wanted. But human beings are wired for connection, even those who fear it most. The absence of communication, affection, and presence begins to highlight a truth they've been pushing away. Relationships aren't meant to be managed from arm's length. Space that was supposed to protect them now leaves them without the warmth of the partner who once reached tirelessly for closeness. This shift is powerful because the avoidant often underestimates the value of what they've been given. When an anxious partner reaches out, it can feel like too much, but underneath every text, every attempt to talk, every gesture is an act of care. It is someone saying, "I want this to work." When that disappears, the avoidant no longer has that steady signal of love and commitment. Instead, the silence forces them to sit with the reality that they're alone, not because they were abandoned suddenly, but because the space they kept creating finally became permanent. Freedom without connection quickly turns hollow. At first, the avoidant enjoys not being pursued, but as that continues, regret sets in. They remember the comfort of someone always being there, even if they didn't always know how to receive it. They begin to realize that what they framed as pressure was really devotion. And it is only when that devotion stops reaching them that they can see it for what it truly was. Space in small doses can give clarity and breathing room, but when used as a shield, it backfires. The very thing the avoidant was protecting, the relationship itself, crumbles because intimacy cannot survive without reciprocity. The avoidant learns too late that space isn't the same as freedom, because true freedom in love comes not from avoiding intimacy, but from choosing it willingly and without fear. For someone with an anxious attachment style, the deepest fear they carry is being left behind. It shapes how they show up in a relationship, their constant checking in, their need for reassurance, their desire to feel close and secure. Every unanswered message feels like confirmation of abandonment. Every moment of distance feels like proof that they are too much or not enough. And so they hold on tightly. They compromise their boundaries, they overextend themselves, and they convince themselves that if they can just do more, give more, love harder, the other person won't leave. But here's where the shift happens. The moment comes when the anxious partner realizes that the very thing they're most afraid of, walking away, is the one act that holds their greatest power. Because in choosing to leave a dynamic that continually drains them, they step out of fear and into self-worth. They stop defining themselves by whether the avoidant turns toward them or away from them. They begin to see that abandonment isn't the end of their story. It's the beginning of reclaiming their strength. This act of walking away isn't dramatic. It's not a slammed door or a bitter goodbye. It's often quiet, steady, and resolute. The anxious partner, after so many cycles of chasing and pleading, finally says to themselves, "I can't keep doing this." And in that decision, they step into an energy the avoidant never expected: empowerment. It's no longer about trying to pull someone closer who resists. It's about protecting their own peace, about choosing not to participate in a cycle that keeps them feeling small. Ironically, this is the moment that shifts the entire balance of power in the relationship. The avoidant, who was so accustomed to being pursued, suddenly feels the absence of that energy. They are left with silence where there was once effort, and they realize that the anxious partner has given themselves permission to stop proving their worth. This is not punishment. It is liberation. The anxious partner is no longer living in reaction to the avoidance walls. They've stepped into a space where they finally acknowledge, "I deserve love that doesn't feel like chasing. I deserve connection that doesn't feel like begging." What makes this moment so powerful is that the anxious partner discovers something they never saw clearly before. They are capable of withstanding the very thing they thought would break them. Walking away doesn't destroy them. It rebuilds them. It shows them that their value is not dependent on whether someone avoids or embraces intimacy. And that realization changes everything. The avoidant often only grasps the weight of this when it's too late. What they once dismissed as neediness, they now recognize as loyalty. What they once pushed away, they now wish they could have back. But by then, the anxious partner has already stepped into a different kind of strength. The strength of someone who finally understands that leaving isn't loss, it's self-respect. And that self-respect is more powerful than any fear of abandonment could ever be. Regret doesn't usually hit the avoidant partner in the heat of conflict. In those moments, they feel justified in pulling away. Arguments and emotional pleas only reinforce their belief that closeness equals chaos, that intimacy is suffocating, and that distance is the safest choice. During the storm, they feel certain they are right to withdraw. They convince themselves they need space, that they are protecting their independence, or that their partner is simply asking for too much. It isn't during those moments that regret finds them. Regret comes in the quiet after. It comes when the anxious partner, tired of the same cycles, stops fighting. When the late night texts don't appear. When the calls stop coming. When the attempts to fix and repair finally fall silent. The avoidant is left with stillness. And it is in that stillness that a truth begins to settle in. The anxious partner wasn't trying to control them. They were trying to love them. Every message, every plea, every attempt at closeness was never about suffocating. It was about connection, about wanting to make things work, about believing in the relationship enough to fight for it. In the absence of pursuit, the avoidant feels the weight of what's been lost. At first, they may mistake it for peace, but as days turn into weeks, the silence no longer feels freeing. It feels like absence. It feels like emptiness. And in that space, they begin to reflect. They replay the moments they dismissed as pressure, the times they brushed off their partner's needs, the way they convinced themselves that pulling away was strength. Slowly, the meaning of those moments shifts. What once felt like suffocation now looks like dedication. What once felt like nagging now looks like effort. And what once felt overwhelming now feels irreplaceable. Regret grows in those realizations because the avoidant understands too late that intimacy isn't the enemy. They see, often only in hindsight, that what they were running from was the very thing they wanted deep down, to be loved fully and consistently. But by the time this awareness arrives, the anxious partner may have already reclaimed their power and stepped away. The avoidant is left holding the weight of opportunities missed, of love unacknowledged, of moments they can't get back. This regret is sharp because it contrasts so strongly with their earlier certainty. When they pushed their partner away, they believed they were protecting themselves. But now, in the silence, they realized that the cost of that protection was connection. The conflict didn't take the relationship away. The quiet did. Not the storm, but the calm afterward. And that is where regret always strikes hardest. It is not in the heat of words exchanged, but in the emptiness that follows when the other person no longer reaches out, no longer fights, no longer shows up. It's in that silence that the avoidant sees with painful clarity what they've lost, and the weight of that realization lingers long after the conflict is gone. When the anxious partner finally stops chasing, their decision is often misunderstood by the avoidant. It may look like punishment, like an attempt to manipulate or create guilt. But in truth, it's not about revenge. It's about a quiet reclaiming of self-worth. For so long, the anxious partner's energy has gone outward, trying to interpret mixed signals, trying to repair distance, trying to hold together a relationship that felt uneven. Every ounce of their effort was fueled by the hope that if they just did enough, the avoidant would meet them halfway. But there comes a moment when they recognize that constantly chasing isn't love, it's depletion. The shift begins with exhaustion, but it transforms into clarity. They realize that love should not be one-sided. A healthy relationship isn't built on one person doing the heavy lifting while the other keeps retreating. So instead of pouring all their energy into convincing someone to stay, they begin pouring it back into themselves. This isn't loud or dramatic, it's often quiet, but it's powerful. They start asking different questions, not how can I make them love me, but what do I need to feel safe and valued? That single shift redefines everything. What makes this turning point so profound is that the anxious partner isn't trying to prove anything anymore. They're not strategizing to make the avoidant miss them or regret their choices. Their decision comes from self-preservation. It's about realizing that constantly seeking reassurance from someone unwilling to provide it keeps them locked in a cycle of anxiety. Stepping back isn't about teaching a lesson. It's about choosing peace over turmoil, dignity over desperation, self-love over fear. And yet, it is precisely this shift that often shakes the avoidant to their core. Because for the first time, the anxious partner isn't chasing. For the first time, they aren't trying to break through walls or soften the silence. They've stopped playing the role of the pursuer, and the absence of their energy leaves a void the avoidant can't ignore. That's when regret often surfaces. What felt like space now feels like loss. What felt like independence now feels like isolation. And the avoidant begins to recognize the difference between someone who needed them and someone who chose them. But for the anxious partner, this isn't about whether the avoidant regrets it or not. The transformation is internal. They come to understand that their value has never depended on being accepted by someone who resists intimacy. Their worth is not measured by how much effort they can expend to keep a relationship afloat. Instead, they see clearly that mutual effort, mutual care, and mutual presence are the foundation of true connection. Anything less isn't sustainable, and it isn't enough. This realization doesn't erase the pain of what they've been through, but it reframes it. It shows them that every unanswered text, every moment of distance, every instance of being dismissed was leading them to this point of awakening. And in that awakening, they discover that their growth was never about fixing someone else. It was about finally choosing themselves fully and unapologetically. When an anxious partner finally stops chasing, it's not the end of the story, it's the beginning of a new one. It's the moment they choose self-worth over fear, peace over chaos, and authenticity over exhaustion. And yes, it often leaves the avoidant with regret. But this was never about regret. It was never about proving a point or making someone feel guilty. It was about stepping into strength, into dignity, into the kind of love that starts from within. The truth is, love cannot thrive in a dynamic where one person runs and the other endlessly chases. Real connection requires two people willing to meet in the middle, to show up, and to make each other feel safe. When the anxious partner stops overgiving, it forces that truth into the open. And while the avoidant may come to see what they've lost, the true victory lies in the anxious partner finally recognizing what they deserve. So if you find yourself in that place, tired of chasing, tired of pleading, tired of giving more than you receive, remember this: walking away is not weakness. It is not failure. It is the bravest declaration of self-respect you will ever make. And sometimes the most powerful love story you'll ever tell is the one where you finally choose yourself. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for giving your heart the space to hear these words. I hope you carry this message with you. You are worthy of love that doesn't make you chase it. You are worthy of reciprocity, respect, and peace. And when you finally claim that truth, everything changes. Thank you and goodbye.